So excited about the series. Oh, thank you for that. We do record these. So again, I'm so excited. This is a topic that I actually would have started with, but when I polled everybody to ask them what they wanted to hear about, the most popular topic was releasing all of the toxins from their homes. That's why we talked about that first. But today we're going to be talking about triggers and what is a trigger and how do triggers manifest within us? How do they get created? And we're going to look at that from multiple different viewpoints, from different realms that I've studied. And then once you understand how they happen, then we're going to talk about what do you do about it. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen. Let me go ahead and do that. Okay. And maybe, how do I consider myself technology savvy, but sometimes it's a challenge for me. Okay, so we're talking about letting go of triggers. I didn't even share this before I even get started. If you could drop any number in the chat and let me know if you feel like you get triggered by your past experiences, if something happens that triggers you on a regular basis, whether that's daily, whether that's weekly, whether that's all the time. Drop a 1 in the chat, a 2 in the chat, whatever number feels good to you. Just want to make sure that this is something, obviously you're here because you want to hear about this topic, but I'm just interested to know, how frequently this affects everybody. And I'm going to tell you a little bit of my story and why this is something all the freaking time, why this is something that I'm even sharing with you guys today. So that's how I'm going to start. And if you guys heard me speak at Luke's World Class Wealth event, I shared this part of my story, but not everybody that's on this call was there. So if you're following me now and have been following me for the last year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever length of time that is, you might find this a little bit hard to believe, but 8 years ago, this was me. And yeah, I'm a little heavier, but that's not even the point of why I'm sharing that picture. I just had to find a photo of full body me 8 years ago. And I wasn't even looking at the camera in this picture, but I was a little bit of a mess. And by a little bit, I mean like a lot of it. I had a huge anger issue. I was always frustrated. I had an attitude problem. I just made a post about this. I think it was today. I loved it when somebody would not give me my way because that meant that I got to argue with people. And I loved to argue with people. And I felt that I always won when I got to argue with people. Customer service representatives, I was the boss at the gym that I was working at, and people were afraid of me. They were afraid of, they kind of gauged what kind of day they were going to have by what attitude I had when I walked in the door. Like, is it a good crystal day or is it a bad crystal day? And I was pretty proud of that, actually. It was part of my identity. I had a really big chip on my shoulder. I was just really angry. And in addition to being angry, I had anxiety that was pretty debilitating. I couldn't function. I know I've had conversations actually with some of you one-on-one about this exact topic. I couldn't function with all of the anxiety that afflicted me. And I felt like I was always going to live that way. I never wanted to be medicated for the anxiety because I had seen people be addicted to anxiety medication. And that's nothing against you if you are medicated for it. But I definitely blamed all of my issues, frustration, pain, anger, irritation, anxiety. I blamed that on everyone and everything. It was because this happened. It was because so-and-so said this. It was because such and such did that. And I was also physically unhealthy. So that was me 8 years ago. And to go a little bit deeper, I'm going to talk about how my traumas actually became triggers. So most of the stuff that we are traumatized by, it happens to us when we're young. And I'm going to go in depth in that in a few. But for me, my uncle committed suicide at age 4. Now, I don't remember him. I'm sure I met him, but the reason this was a trauma for me was because I remember the day that my mom got the phone call that this happened. I remember what my living room looked like, where my furniture was placed. We used to have a corded telephone, like the kind that you like hang up on the cradle, and like it had a Rolodex dial. And I'm dating myself for those of you who have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about. But my mom got this phone call. And of course, I didn't hear what was being stated on the other side. But all of a sudden, she screamed bloody murder, like screamed bloody murder. And she had the handset of the phone and she was beating it on the floor and she was screaming no. And I was terrified because I had never seen her react like that to anything. I didn't know what was going on. And I tried to run to help her. And my dad, who was also there, I think he was the one that answered the phone, scooped me up, pulled me away, and told me, no, 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 and took me into this other room while my mom's hysterically freaking out. So that was a trauma for me. My parents divorced at age 5. So that might not sound like a trauma to some of you who may have experienced something that's a lot deeper than that. But I'm going to explain why for me at the age of 5, it was a trauma. And that's because I didn't understand what was happening. I was 5. And so my parents, I remember the conversation where they brought me in my room and they're like, we're getting divorced. Mommy and daddy aren't going to live together anymore, but we still love you very much. This, that, and the other, something along those lines. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, I just wanted to play. I didn't get it. And I didn't get the severity of it, the depth of it. Right. So I don't know how much time passed, but we were going to the airport and we had gone to the airport together before. So nothing was weird, except I could feel my dad's energy. He was carrying me and he felt different and something felt different. And then we get to the gate, and this was before 9/11. So you could actually take the people that you were dropping off to the airport all the way to the gate at this point. And there was no like TSA security, like definitely not in depth as it was now, or as it is now. And my dad was like squeezing me and he was crying, and he does this thing where he like pets my hair, and he was like petting my hair, and I was like, what is going on? And then they made like this announcement over the loudspeaker, and my dad handed me to my mom, and well, tried to hand me to her. He started to like pull me off of her and, hand me to her. And I clung to him, like hooked my fingers behind his neck. And I was like, no, 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 this isn't happening. And I screamed, and I was the one screaming bloody murder, like that shrill, high pitched scream. And I freaked. And finally, my mom got me and, walked away from my dad, who didn't follow us. And I felt at that moment that I was never going to see my dad again, which is not what happened, by the way. I saw my dad all the time. He was very present in my life, but that moment was a trauma for me. Then later on, I grew up in 2 completely different cultures. My dad's from Puerto Rico. My mom's from Indiana. If any of you know either of those cultures, that's like the Latin culture and then like the Midwest culture. Very, very different. And so I had kind of like a, I don't know who I am thing happening, where I wanted to fit in with my dad's side of the family when I was with them. And then the same thing with my mom's side of the family when I was with them. And they were both amazing. Like I had a lot of love from both sides of my family, but they were completely different sides of the coin. And so when I would switch locations every summer and school year between each family, I had to like remember who I was all over again. And this went on for years, like from age 7, I think was the first time that I switched between the 2 of them, all the way until my teenage years, honestly, all the way until my adulthood, before I figured out that this was a thing that created like a need to fit in and be like everybody else, right? Which isn't necessarily a trauma, but it was a trigger, because that's how I acted in every other scenario and situation that I found myself in. So I put here that my first serious relationship was in 7th grade. Oh no, we're not done. Go back. So my first serious relationship in 7th grade meant that's when I lost my virginity. I was 13. And I think I had been dating him for like 8 months or something. But then after that, I felt uncomfortable with like continuing that. So I was like, well, I don't think I want to do this anymore. And I ended the relationship. And then I became a serial monogamist. And if you don't know what that means, it means that you cannot be single, that you're always with somebody. So this was another thing that didn't really allow me to figure out who I was at the time. And I'm not going to go into each and every one of the relationships, but again, started at age 13 and, didn't meet my husband until I was 30. So for 17 years, I was in long-term relationships with one guy after the other who treated me like crap, for lack of a better word. So lovingly called my second, third, I don't know, boyfriend, street pharmacist here, who was physically abusive. I was like 16 and he was 18. And he was physically abusive. I mean, there's no other way to put it. And I stayed in that relationship for 2 years. And what was happening here is that due to this, my parents divorcing at age 5, and me growing up in the two completely different cultures as well, but more the divorce. And I'm not blaming the divorce, right? We're not blaming the things that create our triggers to make ourselves victims. But I didn't realize what was happening. And that was that I was afraid of abandonment. I was afraid that people would leave me. And because I was afraid of that, I put up with anything and everything from anyone and everyone, as long as they just didn't leave me. So when enough was enough, and some people have never heard this before, so apologies to my family if you didn't know this story, if you watch this later. But after a really big argument with this guy, I chased him out into my driveway, I think, and we're yelling in my front yard, super like classy, right? Yelling in my front yard about, I don't even know what. And he spit in my face and headbutted me. And I was like, okay, I'm done. My mom was at work. I called her. She left work immediately, called the cops, made him leave, get all of his stuff out of the house. And he actually had a key to the house. So we also changed the locks. So then the next, there were other relationships in between that one, but of note, the next one was a guy that I was best friends with during high school. And he became my fiance. We dated for 5 years, but he was mentally and emotionally abusive. I used to be a tomboy, and I had a lot of friends that were male and not very many that were female. And when I started dating this guy, that was all of a sudden a problem. And he, who had the same friend circle as me, by the way, became extremely jealous and afraid that all of the people that were surrounding me, all of my friends, were actually guys that just wanted to date me. And therefore, he genuinely didn't allow me to have friends with these people, to be friends with these people. So I hid my friendships from him. And this is when I found West Coast swing dancing. And, I don't know if you guys know this, but you can put your relationship status on Facebook. And this is before Instagram, before TikTok. It was back in the days of MySpace and Facebook, right? So I had my Facebook relationship status as engaged. And when I broke up with this guy, I switched it over to single. And this person that I went to high school with and joined the Navy and lived in Virginia saw that and immediately was in my inbox. And I didn't even recognize that he was, oh, looky there. I'm gonna jump in on that, which is exactly what he did. And he was married. And he told me that after we had been dating for like 4 months, but he told me that he was separated and that the only reason he wasn't divorced was because his wife was deployed. And so that was all a lie, by the way. They were definitely not separated. He was just cheating on her. And then immediately after that relationship, I started dating this dancer who was a lying, cheating, manipulative person. And we were together for 4 years. And I found out he cheated on me, broke up with him, and then went back to him. So my reason in telling you all of this is because in depth, if any of this looks like you or something that you've been through or something that you recognize, drop a 5 in the chat. If you've been through any of this, any of the things that I just said, from suicide to the manipulative man, right? So by this point, when quite a few of you, by this point, when I was here, I was like, well, all men are liars and cheaters and manipulative, and they're just going to treat me like crap. So I'm just going to be single for a year. And I'm going to get to that later, maybe, but I want to go into this and how this even happened. Because what happened was my original experiences, those 2-3 things that happened when I was 4 or 5, they were embedded in my subconscious mind. And I'm going to explain this if you guys have studied Bob Proctor, then you know this is the way that Bob Proctor explains it. So our thoughts affect us, and they dictate a lot of things about us. And we have a separation between our conscious mind and our subconscious mind. So our conscious mind is where all of our thoughts are coming from, all of the things that we're aware that we're thinking. And these thoughts, our thinking mind has the ability to accept or reject the ideas that enter it. And it's a filter. So for example, now that we have this conscious mind, which we didn't always have, our conscious mind can accept or reject the things that go into the subconscious and stop it from kind of penetrating deep in there, if you will. The thing is, our subconscious mind is all the thoughts, all the emotions, rather, it's our feeling mind where our emotions come from. And it's 1,000,000 times more powerful than the conscious mind. And most of the time, the subconscious mind is what's in the driver's seat. And the subconscious mind is also like a sponge. So it absorbs everything that goes into it. And because we're unaware of the thoughts that go through or the feelings that come into our subconscious mind, 95% of the thoughts that we have today are the same thoughts that we had yesterday and the same thoughts that we'll have tomorrow. And maybe if you've never heard that before, that doesn't make sense because you're like, well, yesterday was absolutely nothing like today. And tomorrow is going to be absolutely nothing like yesterday. That's true. One of my friends, I don't know if she's on this call, always says it's a new day, a day we have never lived before. And it is always a new day that we've never lived before. But our thoughts are still repeating in our minds at all times. And so what happens is stuff goes into our conscious mind, into our subconscious mind, and our feelings dictate our actions going into our little body here. And those actions create our results. So this is another picture of the exact same thing. And I just want to reiterate what happens. We have our senses, everything that we hear, we see, we smell, touch, we taste, words we speak. Those go into our conscious mind. And because they can accept and reject and originate ideas, then when information is impressed with repetition, it can be passed on to the subconscious mind, unless the conscious mind's not paying attention, in which case, whatever is going on around you goes directly into the subconscious mind. So our intellectual factors like imagination, will, memory, intuition, reason, perception, they all come from our thoughts, our conscious mind. And then our subconscious mind works just totally in feelings. Like, how are we feeling? Our feelings dictate so much about the way that we operate, and whether we do or don't do the things that we say we're going to do, and whether we stay motivated, and whether we continue to follow through on the actions that we set forth. But with that subconscious having to accept everything that is impressed upon it, especially when it's got emotion, it controls the vibration of your body, the energy level that you have. And the actions is like the doing part of your personality. Like, what is it that you do on a day-to-day basis? Especially those of you that work from home. Like, are you disciplined enough to do the things that you said you were going to do and go after the goals that you said that you were going to accomplish, and let go of the things that you said you were going to let go of? It controls the action and the behavior part of your personality. So the reason all of this is like important to understand is because when you were a baby, you didn't have a conscious mind until you were 7. When it started to develop, that filter was not there. So remember, I told you my uncle died when I was 4 and my parents got divorced when I was 5. Now, those are the 2 big things that I remember, but that doesn't mean that there weren't various other things that happened that didn't get imprinted into my subconscious mind. Everything that you're listening to, that you're surrounded by, the conversations that people are having, the attitudes that your family has, the beliefs, the energy, the radio, the television, things that you read, the shows that they have on in the background, the people that you hear when you walk through a shopping mall, all of that's going into your subconscious when you're a baby. And it's creating your paradigms, which I'm going to, I think, explain in just a second. But the filter's not there until you're 7. And so all of those things are sucked in like a sponge. And by the way, when you turn 7 and get a little bit older, 8, 9, 10, just because you have the filter now doesn't mean that you have the ability to manage the emotional repercussions of everything that you experience from the time you were born until age 7. So that's where a paradigm comes in. And this is interesting because your paradigm has a huge influence over so much about you. And this is like a mental programming that has pretty much exclusive control over all the habits that you have. Everything, almost everything that you do is habitual, from the way that you wake up in the morning, like what hand you use when you brush your teeth, what order you wash your body in the shower. When you get out of bed, where do you go? Do you go straight into the bathroom? Do you go into your kitchen? All of those different things are all habitual to the point that you don't remember that it's happening. That's your subconscious mind in the driver's seat. But it also creates this other thing with your paradigm, like how creative, effective, productive, logical, and perceptive you are. Your perception is the one thing that if you can change this, then you can change all of these other things. And I'm not really going to talk too much about this today because it's not the point of the triggers thing, but it was worth mentioning for repetition's sake, because those of you that have studied this information understand that repetition is key, but also in case anybody on here has never heard this before. So this is what happens to you. And this is, again, how a lot of your traumas get created. When you didn't, a lot of us are in the state of ignorance, meaning we're unaware. And I'm going to look at that from a totally different viewpoint after I explain all of this. But when you're unaware, you have like a fear of the unknown most of the time. And the fear doesn't matriculate until it gets into your subconscious mind, because this ignorance is just the state that you are in. And then the worry and the doubt, those are thoughts. You start worrying and doubting. Like, let's say you've been in toxic relationships for the last 10 years and you just want a healthy relationship. But because you haven't ever had a healthy relationship and you just want to hope that this next person is different, you have worries and doubts about whether or not that's actually going to happen. And then when you get into this next relationship with this next person, you start to have fears. Those conscious thoughts move into your subconscious mind, and the feeling that you feel is fear. And you don't want to feel the fear, but it's there nonetheless. And it moves into your body and it turns into an actual physical thing that you can feel called anxiety. Now, this isn't the only thing that people feel anxiety for. Sometimes it's like the next step that's going to be in their lives, or if the job that they're in is the right job for them, or maybe they want to quit their job and start their own business, or maybe they want to, I don't know, just change their life in general. Anxiety is, I'm not here to talk necessarily about what causes anxiety, but how it happens. And when you feel the anxiety, what most people do is they suppress it. They don't want to feel it, so they suppress it. They push it down and they're like, no, we're not going to feel this. And then a lot of people, actually, I think it's like 47% of people that have anxiety have also felt depressed at one point or another. So they feel depressed, they feel low energy, they have lethargy, they have no motivation to do anything, they have a problem, a challenge getting out of bed, and they feel depressed. And if you stay in that state for any amount of time, really, then you're going to start dis-ease. Dis-ease is going to show up in your body. Dis-ease meaning that you are going to be in a state of dis-ease, and you are going to start feeling that. you're going to start having low back pain. You're going to start getting colds and flus. You're going to maybe develop a chest cold. You're going to have abdominal issues. You're going to have digestive issues. You're going to have urinary tract issues. You might even have sexual function disorders. All of these different things in your body are going to start happening. And if you let yourself stay in that state of dis-ease, then your body's going to start disintegrating. So this is just the physical of what's happening with the whole trauma. And I'm going to look at it from a totally different perspective, like I said. But what you can do is you can make yourself aware. You can get out of the state of ignorance and into the state of knowledge and awareness. And when you study and you learn more information, not just about this, but about yourself, then you can understand things instead of worrying and doubting. And you can know, you get into like a state of knowingness. And when you're in that state of knowingness, now you have faith. And because most of us have heard that faith and fear can't live in the same house, right? So when you're in a state of faith, then things can move forward and you can begin to feel good, like a state of well-being, not a state of anxiety. That anxiety that you once had, it goes away. And I didn't even go into this, but with all those stages that I explained to y'all that I went through, I had anxiety from age, I think 17 until about 30, 31. And I don't never feel anxiety anymore, but I used to feel it all the time, almost every day. And sometimes I would have anxiety attacks and sometimes it would be debilitating and I wouldn't be able to go to work. And I was in this over here, I was in this left column, ignorance, worry, fear, anxiety, suppression. And I had multiple bouts of depression as well. So back to this right side, we're in this well-being state. We're not feeling this anxiety anymore. Maybe it feels weird to not feel anxiety because we've never not felt it, which is where I was when I first got into this space. And you start to want to express and step into like this state of expression and be just expressing yourself. And this allows you to accelerate. And you're no longer in the state of dis-ease, you're now at ease, and now you can create. And that's where I am right now with all of the different businesses that I am creating and all of the different things that are growing in my life. When I finally find your passion and you start going after it without that fear, without the worry, without the anxiety, and you're just ready to accelerate, create, and grow. And so that's kind of a little bit of the transition. So that's the Bob Proctor way. I learned all of that from Bob Proctor. If you want to learn more about that explanation, then definitely look into Bob Proctor. So this I learned at the exact same time that I learned about Bob Proctor. These words here are not English. This is Sanskrit, and this is the yogic way to look at it. Now, before you hop off the call, because I'm starting talking about yoga, right? Just hear me out, okay? This yoga is a study of yourself, and chitta is how you pronounce that word, is the heart-mind field of consciousness, which if you were paying attention to what I just said, then you are going to see the parallels between what I'm talking about now and the way I just explained it, because there's multiple different ways to learn the exact same information. So what's it say here? We're conditioned by our own individual experiences through what? Our senses. I think it was like the third slide. I said that exact same thing. See, hear, smell, taste, speak, touch. Our sensory output is accepted, processed, and integrated into us. So everything that's coming from our outside world gets accepted through our heart-mind field of consciousness. It gets processed, and then it gets integrated into us, which again is exactly what I just said. And then our heart mind, our chitta, our field of consciousness, ruminates, remembers, and then directs our thoughts, our words, and our actions, AKA the paradigm. Okay. So it stores our experiences, our emotions, and our memories. And this is where the construction of our identity comes from. Remember, I was explaining how I was living in two different cultures and I didn't know what my identity was. And I lived like that for a really long time before I figured out who I was, what I wanted. And that goes even more in depth. And we're not even going to talk about that on today's call. Then what happens is our experiences equal impressions. And then that's where our opinions, our biases, our prejudices, and our habitual behavior, again with the paradigms, come from. So the deep thought patterns that we have, which are habitual, affect our perception. And like I said, in that paradigm slide, perception is the one thing that you want to change that's going to affect everything else. The way that you see things affects the way that you react to pretty much everything. And this heart mind sits between the outside world, your environment, and your inner light of awareness, which is like your inner you. And when it's cluttered with all this mental and emotional baggage, then it prevents your inner light from shining. Because, my loves, each and every one of you has this amazing inner light, and some of you have never experienced that, but that does not mean that it's not there. So what happens is we have mental, emotional afflictions, and these are seeds that become planted and they turn into inner thorns. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a story. And if you've been on calls of mine in the past, you might have heard this before, but what is an inner thorn? I'm going to tell you what an inner thorn is. This comes from this book, The Untethered Soul, which, by the way, is my favorite book of all time. So an inner thorn is what happens when you have a seed, an experience that leaves an impression on you, and that impression is one that you don't want to repeat, or maybe it's one that you do want to repeat. And I'll explain the different types of mental, emotional afflictions after I tell this story. So you have something that leaves either a positive, a negative, or a neutral impression on you. And then time passes and something else happens and it leaves another impression on you. And it grows this thorn. And this thorn is another word for your triggers. The things that you either avoid or you try to reach for, the things that create your ego, that lower your awareness, that change your perception. And in this book, The Untethered Soul, they talk about the inner thorn, but they explain it like an outer thorn, like an actual thorn. Imagine that you have a thorn, a big thorn in a nerve in your arm, and it's sticking out, protruding beyond your physical body. And if you touch it, it shoots writhing pain up your arm, and it's excruciating. And you do not want to feel that. And you live in a house in the woods, and you like to go for walks. But whenever you go for walks, your thorn gets caught on the brush, and it sends this writhing pain up your arm. So you take your machete, and you clear all the brush from the path. And now you can walk easily through the path without touching this thorn that's pressing on the nerve in your arm. And then you meet someone, and this person wants to get close to you, and they want to hug you, and they want to touch you, but you can't let them touch you because they're going to touch the thorn in your arm. So you wrap it in bubble wrap, and you put it and you protect it. So now if you put it in bubble wrap, then it's good. It stays stable. And it's not touchable. You can't touch it. So now you can hug your significant other, this person that wants to touch you, that wants to be with you. And it's hard to sleep in that thing. It's uncomfortable. You can't move. It's like big. You can only lay in one position. It's awkward. So you're like, you know what? I've got to build this apparatus. And I'm going to make it like this thing that I take off and put back on, so that when I sleep, I don't have to have this bubble wrap thing on my arm that keeps me stable. So you build this apparatus, and it's super fancy, and it has hydraulics, and it's got like these big wheels, and you can roll it through everything, but it doesn't fit through your doorway. So you widen your doorway, and then you build a ramp so that you can roll out of your house and into the woods so that you can take your walks and everything is just fine. And you tell yourself, I'm good. I'm fine. This thorn doesn't affect me. But if you actually were listening to the story, then you can see that it affects every single part of your life. Because you took the first route. You took the route of protecting the thorn and stopping it from being touched. And when we do this, we often are teaching people how to treat us and telling people, I don't like it when you say, I don't like it when you do. Can you please not because it makes me feel, right? But instead of all of that, you could just take the thorn out and let it go. And now there's no need for any of those things. You don't need the machete, you don't need the bubble wrap, you don't need the hydraulic apparatus, you don't need to widen your doors, you don't need to build a ramp. And we're going to talk about letting go more. But I wanted to explain what an inner thorn is, because an inner thorn is a synonym for your triggers. So there's 5 different kinds of mental emotional afflictions, which again are those seeds that become the inner thorns. And this is what your triggers are probably made of. Our lack of awareness, I'm going to go in depth on all of these. And the lack of awareness is most important, because without lack of awareness, you cannot have the other 4 afflictions. We've got egotism, which is feeling like you're more than you are, or feeling like you're less than you are, which is not based on truth. Then there's your desire to repeat previously experienced pleasure and your aversion to previously experienced pain. And then the fear of death, the will to live, your survival instinct. So we're going to go in depth on these. So these words in parentheses are the Sanskrit words for these, because again, this does come from yoga. So I'm going to talk about each one of these, and then I'm going to give you some things to think about. So hopefully you guys are taking notes on this. So the lack of awareness is fear born from ignorance, which is exactly the same thing that I just said in the Bob Proctor model, right? It was on the left side at the top of the page, fear born from ignorance. It's a lack of understanding. It's a lack of awareness. And when you are in this space, you are in the dark about something. You don't know. It's like a fear of the unknown. And you act out of blind ignorance because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know how it's going to turn out. You don't know what's going to happen next. So your increasing awareness decreases your ignorance, which again is exactly what I said in the Bob Proctor model. And we have this field of consciousness that is muddled by what? Our perceptions and our actions, and these can be harmful to us or to the people around us. This is, again, the seed that feeds the other emotional afflictions. So a couple exercises, and luckily this is being recorded, but try and write this down because I am going to go through these fairly quickly. Think of a situation in which your perception was clouded by your preconceived notions, like you thought you knew exactly what was happening, but you were wrong. To prevent this from happening again, to prevent using your preconceived notions, your lack of awareness, you don't know the whole story. To prevent this from happening again, what can you learn? So ask yourself, what can you learn from that, from doing that, from living in that space? Another thought on this topic is the next time you're in a restaurant where you can smell the food being prepared in the kitchen, or even if it's in your own home and and you're not the one cooking it, you can smell the food being prepared. Can you isolate a single smell, like a spice, the rosemary, the garlic, the tomatoes, maybe the vanilla, whatever it is on a plate? Imagine the smells is all of the cloudiness, right? If you can smell it all merged together. And when you focus on this single one, this is the truth. This is what you're trying to know accurately. This is the awareness. It's like removing the lack of awareness. It's like eliminating all those smells except for that single food. And then another way, one more. Picture yourself walking into a dark room, and all of a sudden someone jumps out and scares you. If you knew they were there, would that have scared you? Would you have had a different reaction? Your reaction would have been a lot less different because you were aware of their presence, right? So how much does your level of awareness change your level of fear? The more you're aware of, the weaker or the stronger, your awareness becomes. So that's the first affliction. The second one is distorted sense of self. Distorted sense of self. So this is egotism or insecurity. These are both forms of delusion. Like I said, they don't represent the truth. And the truth is that you, me, we, all of us here, nobody is better or worse than anybody else. Nobody is better or worse than anyone else. When we're in this distorted sense of self, we think that we are our body, that we are our mind, that we are our thoughts, and we are our emotions. But really, we're souls, and we have bodies, and we have minds, and those minds have thoughts, and they yield emotions. And when we're in this distorted sense of self, we're limiting our being, like who we are, to our name or our occupation, or who likes us or dislikes us, or what we like and what we dislike, and what we've accomplished and what we haven't accomplished, and what our status is and what other people think of us. But we're so much bigger than that. And then the egotism versus the insecurity. So egotism is when you find yourself like you really feel like you're better than other people. You're bragging, you're conceited, you feel self-centered. Maybe you're even condescending to people that are not at your level. You have arrogance, you have like this want for power, this want for control. Or the opposite, you're insecure. You have complete self-doubt. You don't believe in yourself at all. You're negatively comparing yourself to other people and wishing that you could be like them, do like them. You feel embarrassed, you feel inferior. But when you have a healthy sense of self, you can see yourself as equal to others, and you can welcome suggestions for self-improvement. Listening to your inner divine voice, your higher self, and make your ego, which is just a role that you're playing. Your ego is just a role. Make your ego the servant instead of the master. So, ways to exercise this is the next time you're in a class or in any learning situation and you feel too embarrassed to ask a question, ask the question anyway, and then reflect on how you feel afterwards. The next time you feel peer pressure to attend an event that you're not interested in, step back and see if you can muster the strength to say no anyways. Stop saying yes to things that you don't want to say yes to. And then think of a situation in which you perceive yourself as better than those around you. Like, we were in an inner circle call in a mastermind with my husband, and we were actually having this conversation where sometimes you learn and you grow to a higher level than you were before, and you get around people that haven't done any self-improvement. And just because you've studied more than they have, that doesn't mean you're better than them. It's just an example from my own personal reality. So moving forward, we have our clinging to past pleasure. Okay, and these next two are the ones that are like the most common. When we have a pleasurable experience, we form this really strong attachment to it, and then we really want to have that same experience again. We want to relive it. We want to recreate this pleasurable experience. And if it doesn't happen, if we don't get what we want, then we feel suffering. This picture I thought was perfect because it was former me. If anybody was trying to leave, I was like, no, don't go. I love you. Please, please stay with me. But we have this pleasurable experience and we form this attachment to it. And this can be about anything. It can be about a relationship. It can be about a memory. It can be trying to make a relationship what it used to be when it's evolved into something else. And you desire to repeat this feeling of pleasure, and it turns into this fear. All of these mental, emotional afflictions are literally created or living within fear. And it turns into a fear that you're not going to experience it again. And this is actually one of the ways that addictions are created. Addiction to sugar, alcohol, narcotics, gambling, toxic relationships, right? I was definitely addicted to toxic relationships. Okay. So to feel how difficult letting go of a seemingly mild attachment can be, think of your absolute favorite food that you like crave and give it up for a while. See how hard that is for you. Maybe you've done that before, so maybe it's not hard, but it's a nice thing to experiment with, to try and see if it's something that affects you on that level. Think of a romantic relationship that you wanted to end. This one's screaming at me, but it kept drawing you back in. Why did you keep going back? What made you return? How can you prevent it from pulling you back again in the future? See, in all those toxic relationships that I was explaining about myself, there were all these bad things that were happening in the relationship. and all these terrible memories and tears and my crying and all of these things. But then I rationalized, but when we're not fighting, like our relationship's really good. But how often were we not fighting? How often did I not feel this big in each of those relationships? So just if that resonates with you, also look back and maybe even ask yourself that question. Because when I was studying this, I was already with Luke, but I had definitely not let go of all of those relationships as far as the suffering that I went through. And then this is like the exact opposite of what we just talked about, clinging to past suffering, right? In the previous slide, I talked about how it's like avoiding it, like you're avoiding suffering, but you're actually clinging to it because it becomes part of your identity. It's like you are trying to avoid repeating an experience that caused you pain, but even though you have this fear of experiencing it again, especially in my case, you keep going to the same types of people that are doing the same types of things to you and hurting you in the same ways. And then never really, it's not like, this doesn't mean there's something wrong with you, but what it probably means is that there's something that you haven't looked at about yourself that needs to be healed. That's what it probably means. So when you are cautious due to a prior hurtful event, this actually can protect you. And most of us rationalize that it is protecting us and that it's helping us, except we're not looking at the bigger picture and what's happening to us big picture wise. So when we suffer from resistance, like we're resisting this painful experience from happening again, which is what typically happens when we're triggered, right? Something reminds us of the original impression that created that inner thorn. Something reminds us of that. And that's when anxiety comes in, at least for me. Anxiety would come in when I was triggered by something that I was like, oh God, it's happening again. I don't want to deal with this again. This is, ugh. And I couldn't words. There were no words. There was just feelings. And then I would get angry and it would turn into like lashing out. And I'll explain that in a little bit, a few slides as well. But it stifles your openness and it contracts your energy, which is why anxiety comes up. Sometimes you get vengeful. Like if somebody hurt you, you want to hurt them back. But that doesn't do anything to help you. That actually just creates more hurt. And that doesn't create loving, healing energy within you. Or sometimes you're angry, which I can definitely identify with. And it affects you when you're angry for the person that hurt you. It affects you more than it hurts the other person. And then all of these different scenarios, we're becoming negatively affected by these clinging to this past suffering. So when you avoid and you hide pain, AKA suppress it, right? You're repressing the emotion, you're burying it deep in your consciousness, and it becomes present in your bodily tissues in the form of, what did I say when I was talking about the Bob Proctor model? Dis-ease, right? Same thing, different way to explain it. So hopefully that makes sense. Oh, the exercises. Are there any foods that you did not like when you were a child and now you avoid them because you didn't like them when you were a child? For me, that was all vegetables. I didn't like any vegetables, none. And I assumed that since I didn't like them when I was a child, I just didn't like them. And then I learned that that's actually not true. I was just avoiding the suffering of food tasting nasty, right? But what the actual situation was, your palate changes. And also, whoever was making me those vegetables when I was a kid did not know how to cook them, because vegetables are yummy. So if you can think of a way to prepare these foods to please your palate, try that. So then choose a sense is the second thing. Choose a sense, your sight, your smell, your taste, the sound. I don't know if I missed one, but you guys know your senses, right? And think of an aversion that you have related to that sense. So maybe like a smell that you can't stand, like a cologne of an ex-boyfriend, or something that you don't like to look at, or something that you don't like the feeling of, or a texture of a food. Is it good for you or is it not good for you? And if it's not good for you, this aversion, then let's eliminate it. And if it is good for you, then of course, maybe it is actually protecting you. And then this last one is one that I don't think I've mastered. I'm going to say I probably haven't mastered all of them, but this one is the fear of death. And the reason that we want to get rid of the fear of death is because when we are not afraid of death, we actually feel fully enlightened. The thing is that when this doesn't have to be just death, right? It's not just like physical your death. It's death of your family members, death of your friends. It's death of relationships. It's death of former you, right? So fear of death is not just literal fear of death. But you get in this fight, flight, or freeze mode when you get in this space, and you're afraid to let go of body, mind, of reputation, habits, of your family, your friends, whether it's their death or yours, or death of the relationship altogether, your possessions, other pieces of your physical existence. And you get in this deep-seated process of duality, and you're like pleasure and pain. And it's an addiction to these mental, emotional afflictions, all of these afflictions that I just explained to you. Death is a part of life, and it's a natural cycle, and it's actually part of our very existence. So when you purify your chitta, your heart mind, and you let go of these attachments, then you can release this fear. So a really good way to step into this and release it is to sit into a meditation until you're completely disconnected from the outside world and ask yourself, who are you now? Releasing all of your roles, letting go of all of those different things. And think of a time when you were in a potentially life-threatening situation. Were you afraid? Why were you afraid? And what did you learn? So those are some questions that you can ask yourself. Okay, so drop a 1 in the chat if this is making sense. I know this is a lot of information, and some of you may have never heard this before, but I would love a little bit of feedback from you guys. Okay, amazing. So what you're really here for is, how do you let go of all of this? But I wanted you to understand where it came from in the first place. So that's why we went through all of that. So some of the things that you can do are, you can put a little bit of your practice in action. So you can practice causing positive change in yourself, because the only person that you can really ever change is you. And so creating new positive patterns, that's why if you have ever worked with me, I'm telling you to get a morning routine. I'm telling you to change the habits that you have. I'm telling you to let go of some of the things that are negative. I'm telling you to change your thought patterns. Another thing that you can do to create positive change is start exercising if you're not already, or change the type of exercising that you're doing. Change the direction that you're going in life. Change the path that you're on. If you're not happy, if what you're doing is not something that you're passionate about, then change it. And yeah, you might be saying, well, that sounds really simple. It is. Try it. So the next thing here is studying by and of oneself. This means study you. Right? Study you, look within. Okay. What I mean by that is, during all of these processes, when I was going through the 17 years of toxic relationships, not once did I say, maybe this is something that I need to heal from. Maybe this is something that I need to work on. And I didn't say that until I got into my relationship with Luke, where he basically told me, hey, I think you need to do a little bit of work on yourself and a little bit of growing, because he was growing and he wanted me to grow. But it wasn't just that. It was also, I was taking all of the stuff that had happened to me in those relationships that I explained to y'all, and I was bringing it into my relationship with him. I was going through his phone. I didn't trust him. He didn't do anything to make me not trust him, but I didn't trust him based on the fact that all the other people that I had been with betrayed me. I was always questioning him, asking him where he was, what he was doing, where he was going. He called it the 3rd degree. Then when he wouldn't answer my questions, I was like, obviously you're hiding something. The thing is that your friendships and your relationships act as mirrors. And so, interesting thing with that exact example that I just gave you is, okay, so I was thinking that he was hiding something because he wouldn't answer my questions. But he had a trigger because he was in jail and he was interrogated literally by whoever interrogates you when you're in jail. And when I asked him a bunch of questions, he felt interrogated, which made him close up. And that was his trigger. So my trigger triggered his trigger. And those of you that are in relationships, look at your triggers with the significant other that you're with and ask yourself, is my trigger triggering their trigger? Because the answer is likely yes. And it's not just your significant others. It can be your family, it can be your parents, it can be your siblings, it can be your friends. But these relationships act as mirrors, and they do that to show you things that you need to heal within yourself. So if something bothers you about someone, if something frustrates you about someone, if you get angry at the way that someone behaves, yeah, you can take it and be like, well, they did this to me. Okay, well, how about asking yourself, why does that make you mad? That's very important to be able to ask yourself those questions. Another way that you can study yourself is study new information. Being on this call is a great way. Learning new things and looking at things from a different perspective. And then if you work with me already, you already know I have got to bring up the journal. Okay. Keep a journal of your thoughts and keep a diary of your actions that you want to change. Those are two different things. I never really talk about the actions one. I'm always talking about journaling your thoughts. I'm going to talk about that a little more on the next slide, but keeping a diary of the actions that you want to change is also another really good way to bring awareness. Practice this in action. Like, I always get mad when people do X, or it irritates, like I can't stand being stuck in traffic. It can be anything, but it's a thing that makes you not feel good, angry, frustrated, irritated, anxiety, any negative emotion that lowers your vibration. And then that journal of thoughts is also really, really powerful and important. And then we have our humility and our faith. And our faith comes from surrendering to a higher power. Surrendering to a higher power beyond ourselves. Now, I'm not going to presume to tell you who to believe in or what to believe in here, right? But having faith in a higher power is extremely valuable when it comes to stepping into this higher version of yourself, becoming this new version of you. And when you do this, it eliminates your ego. It lowers that ego, it removes those roles, and it puts you in like a place of humility. You become extremely humble. Okay, so these are my favorite methods of letting go. Allow yourself to feel your feelings. Most of us don't want to feel those feelings, do we? But it's the avoidance of the feelings that makes the feelings more in control of us. And so if you can learn to feel your feelings, that is phenomenal. Now, I'm going to go in depth about this. This means witnessing awareness without judgment. This does not mean expressing your feelings to everyone. I used to do that all the time, right? Have you ever been had a bad day? Let's say, I don't know, you rear-ended somebody on your way to work, and then you spilled coffee on yourself and your shirt got stuck on the doorknob on your way into the office and it ripped. And all the customers were rude, right? It can be anything that looks like that, but I know I'm not the only one that's experienced perpetual bad days. So what happens when you have a bad day? You tell people about it. I used to call my mom and be like, you'll never believe the day I had. And I would tell her all about my day and complain, and she would agree that my day was terrible. And I would complain, like if somebody wronged me, right? Somebody did something to hurt me or did something bad to me or bad in my perception at that moment, I would always take that to people and be like, okay, this person did this and this and this. Well, when you do that, you're literally reliving the anger. You're reliving the frustration. You're reliving the anxiety. You're reliving those emotions. And then we talked about suppression a little bit, but these are the ways that suppression show up for you. When you suppress your emotions, you become irritable, you have mood swings, you have tension in your neck and in your back and other muscles in your body. You have headaches, you might have cramps, menstrual problems, colitis, indigestion, insomnia, hypertension, which is high blood pressure, allergies, and other somatic conditions that show up. And when you're repressing your emotions, then you're typically in denial and you start projecting, which means that you're a victim. And when you're a victim, you start blaming people and places and things and food and social conditions and astrological events and climate and God and fate and luck and the devil and foreigners and ethnic groups and political rivals and anything outside of you, but it's definitely not you, right? It's definitely not something that you need to let go of and heal from. It's totally all these other things. And then we have our escapism, and that's the avoidance of feelings. And that is where workaholics come from, and where, again, addiction comes from, and what the backbone of liquor industries and cannabis farms, not farms, just, you guys know what I'm trying to say. What's the thing where they sell the weed? Dispensaries. But this also looks like endless socializing, talking, never being able to be alone, always reading, music always playing, working too much, traveling all the time, sightseeing, shopping, overeating, gambling, going to the movies all the time, taking pills, using drugs, cocktail partying. This is escapism. Okay. So instead of all of that, just feel the feelings. And I like to say, feel, deal, heal. Okay. Practice responding before reacting. So something bothers you. Instead of reacting immediately, emotionally, pause, breathe, and then speak. Maybe pause, breathe, 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 and then speak. Depends on how much you were affected by whatever it was that you felt the need to react to. But practicing this was the first way that I started to let go. Stop letting my triggers run me. Finding the origin of your trigger, it's almost never the present moment. So if somebody does something to bother you, you might say, oh, well, I was angry because my mom insulted my outfit. And that's very surface level. But why did that make you mad? Same thing I just said on the previous slide. It's not the present moment that bothered you. It's not why you got mad. It's never the original origin, the origin of the present moment. That's never what caused it. It's almost always, if not always, something that happened way back here, maybe 2 years ago, maybe when you were 4. Okay. Figure out the origin, and maybe you don't know it. Maybe you don't want to go that far back. Maybe you blocked the memory. All things that are possible. But journal about the origin of the trigger or the trigger itself, whatever it was that triggered you. Forgive yourself, forgive the person that wronged you in your perception, and then burn the page, releasing it, forgiving, letting it go. And breathing exercises, the more frequent you do breathing exercises, the better. Not only is it phenomenal for your physical body, but it is amazing for your mental health. My favorites are Wim Hof, box breath. Oh, I said box breath twice, didn't I? Alternate nostril breathing, lion's breath was supposed to be the other one, and diaphragmatic breath. If you don't know what any of those are, you can always DM me and I can definitely send you some information. Yoga and meditation. So practicing yoga is actually really helpful for your mental health. It's not necessarily just like a stretchy, flexy exercise thing. And then meditation really is just to quiet down those subconscious thoughts that are running you so that you can be more aware of the ones that are conscious and the ones that are negative, that are stepping out and holding you to this like space of being triggered. Exercising is great. Spending time in nature is great. And aligning your chakras is also phenomenal. If you don't know how to do that, we will talk about that on another call. And if you need guidance on any of this, I think there's going to be a link dropped in the chat, but I do offer virtual personalized healing sessions, both for 60 minutes and for 90 minutes. And this is really just designed to support you on your journey of healing and letting go and releasing. And what I do on these sessions is I evaluate the struggle that you are experiencing or whatever it is that you're going through. I do a little bit of an intuitive reading. I do actually balance your chakras for you. And then I do personalized guided meditations, guidance for mindset development. I'll give you some homework because this is not really a me journey. It's more a you journey. And then I can give you custom recommendations for continued healing. So, I went a little bit over the hour, so I apologize. Thank you all for staying. If you do have any questions right now, I am willing to answer any questions that you might have. So definitely feel free to drop any questions in the chat box. But that is everything that I had prepared for this evening's little chat on triggers. And I hope this information was super helpful to you. Anybody have any questions? No? All right, amazing. Well, definitely copy that link and book a session with me if you have any questions. Amazing. I'm glad it was helpful. Awesome. Thank you guys. I will be doing another call in 2 weeks. I think the date has already been set. So maybe if you guys want to put that in your calendar. Yep, the next call is going to be on the 21st at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. And I will let you know the topic because I haven't decided yet, but September 21st at 7:30 p.m. Yes, there is definitely a recording. We will drop that in the Raising Your Vibration chat. So if you are not in there, send me a DM on Instagram and I will put you in there. And again, I hope you guys all have an amazing night. Thank you for being here and we will see you next time. Good question, Josh. Will they get the link in their email? Yes. Okay. Yes, you will get the link in your email. Bye, guys.